can move to the young now, because this has been a slightly over 50s discussion. I mean,
yeah.
What does it mean to you?
I mean, it's interesting because I think that 68 sort of marked a shift in terms of it was the sort of starting point of the culture of the youth, of which we sort of very prevalent now, this idea that the young will change the world, which is as old as time, but really was kind of cemented from 68. And while the 68ers were truly kind of kicking against the pricks, now it seems like young people are often kicking against an open door. There's this sort of idea that there's mostly older people who are saying that the young are going to be the ones that will change things, whereas, you know, the 68ers grabbed that for themselves and were very defiant. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the kind of remembrances of it, because I think there's not that realisation of actually how different it was then.
Dean, what do you think to that?
I think it shouldn't always be left to the young or thought of as the young are going to save us. I think, you know, because the young grow up and then they're going to say, oh, the next generation of young people are going to save us. Where are the 68ers now? You know, how are they supporting young people now? I think that's what needs to be thought about in any movement. When, you know, the young grow up and find positions of authority and actually have the power and influence to change things, why aren't they supporting those young people?
Of course, the focus is still on youth there, isn't it? It's still about, which is, you know, which has its pros and its cons. It's still very much.
But the young aren't as liberated in a sense. There was a sense of freedom in the 60s because the young weren't as constrained as they are now. Because now it's hard to get a job, you have to struggle to pass your exams, you're constantly being tested in schools, there are all sorts of rules, you have to pay for your university education. None of that applied in the 60s.
But is it also about conforming? I mean, Mark, you know, is your impression that, in a sense, we've got a younger generation which is somehow more radical because it's less radical?
Gosh, well, yes. I mean, I'm very interested in how there's a sort of neo-Puritanism in the air. As you say, Joan, you know, young people seem to be both simultaneously more liberated and somehow more suffocated. And in terms of opportunity, it's really, we've really gone backwards. I mean, what interests me about 68 is how rapidly, and not just chronologically, how rapidly it became the 70s, how rapidly it all soured. You know, it's a funny cusp time that there's so much, it looks like the absolute sort of apogee of it all. And then, you know, then there's Manson, and then there's, suddenly it's the 3-day week and everything's gone wrong. And it's in this sort of space of 5 years, it all seems to go into a very, very different thing. And if you're talking about legacy, I think culturally, if it's anything, it's those brilliant American films of the early 70s, which are both anticipating and then post-Watergate. There's a kind of sourness to it, which tells me the reaction to it.
Do you want a quick last word on that?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about 68 potentially it's a kind of an authentic moment in which politics and young people were clashing, and there was something real to fight for and fight against. And in comparison to the kind of radical nature of the young today, it's often, we spend all our time convincing young people that you are radical, trust us, and you can do something, rather than there's not that kind of authentic upsurge perhaps anymore as it was
if we look at the March for Our Lives in America just recently, I think that shows young people are still taking it into their own hands.
It does. It gives us hope.
Yeah. So we want the young to be radical, actually, Nuzzle, even though it's sometimes inconvenient, right?